Rome, 89 AD, the Colosseum. 80,000 people are screaming. A gladiator named Marcus stands over his defeated opponent. Blood pools in the sand. The crowd roars for mercy or death. The emperor gives the signal. Thumbs down. The blade falls. The crowd erupts. But this is not the horror. The horror begins when the gates close, when the spectators leave, when the torches dim, because in the tunnels beneath the Colosseum, something else is waiting. Not execution, not mercy. Something the Roman Empire spent 2,000 years trying to erase from history. In 2018, archaeologists excavating beneath the Colosseum found something unexpected: a sealed chamber. Inside, hundreds of human remains. 90% were female, ages 14 to 30. And the bones told a story that no historical text ever recorded. Fractures that couldn't have come from combat, marks that suggested prolonged captivity, and evidence of something so disturbing that the Italian government delayed the publication of the findings for 3 years. Before we go deeper into this forbidden history, if you want to see more historical horrors that have been hidden for centuries, subscribe and turn on notifications. This is content that gets buried. Don't let the algorithm hide it from you. In the next 28 minutes, you will discover the 5 horrifying realities of what Roman gladiators did to female prisoners after victory. Not the sanitized version you learned in school. Not the Hollywood fantasy. The archaeological truth. The testimonies buried in forgotten manuscripts. The secrets that Rome built the Colosseum's foundation to hide. This is not a story about heroes. It's a story about power, about what happens when human life becomes entertainment, and about the women whose screams were drowned out by cheering crowds. But before we descend into those tunnels, you need to understand who these gladiators really were, because the men you think you know never existed. Here's what they don't teach you. Gladiators were not warriors. They were slaves, prisoners of war, criminals sentenced to death, men who had already lost everything: their freedom, their families, their humanity. And Rome gave them one chance at survival: kill, again and again and again, until the crowd loved them enough to keep them alive. This is the first psychological key to understanding what comes next. Gladiators were not noble fighters. They were broken men, given permission to break others. And when you give a powerless man power over someone even more powerless, history shows us what happens. The Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator training school in Rome, sat directly beside the Colosseum, connected by underground tunnels. Inside those tunnels, gladiators lived in cells, 10 feet by 10 feet, chained at night, fed barely enough to survive. Their average life expectancy after becoming a gladiator: 3 years. But here's what the tour guides at the Colosseum don't mention. Those tunnels didn't just house gladiators. They housed prisoners, criminals awaiting execution, slaves being punished, and women. Women captured from conquered territories, women accused of crimes against the state, women who belonged to families that opposed the emperor. In Roman law, these women had a specific classification: damnati ad bestias, condemned to the beasts, which meant they would be executed publicly, torn apart by lions, bears, or wild dogs for entertainment. But before that execution, they were kept in those same tunnels, beside the gladiators, separated by iron bars, but not always separated. In 2011, a research team from the British Museum translated a series of graffiti found in the Ludus Magnus tunnels. One inscription, carved into stone, read, Victor took 3. Primus watched. No gods here. For years, historians debated what took 3 meant, until the 2018 excavation provided context. The female remains found beneath the Colosseum weren't just executed prisoners. They were pregnant. 12% of the skeletons showed evidence of pregnancy at time of death, and the fracture patterns suggested. This is where we begin. Secret number 1. In ancient Rome, there was a belief that the blood of a gladiator held power, virility, strength, the essence of Mars, the god of war. Roman women, aristocratic, wealthy, bored, would pay fortunes to spend a single night with a gladiator. It was considered an aphrodisiac, a status symbol. But here's the part they erase from history. Female prisoners had no choice. After a gladiator won a major fight, especially games sponsored by the emperor, there was a tradition. Unspoken, unofficial, but practiced. The tradition was called jus victoriae, the right of victory. It meant that victorious gladiators were granted access to the holding cells, not as a reward from the Roman state, but as something the guards simply allowed. Because in Rome, the lives of damnati, the condemned, held no legal protection. They were already considered dead. So what happened to them before their official execution didn't matter. The graffiti in the Ludus Magnus tells us what happened. Victor took 3 women, in one night, after a victory. The guards watched. Some participated. And in the morning, those women were still scheduled for public execution. No trial, no record, no acknowledgement that anything had occurred. One Roman physician, Galen, who served as a doctor to gladiators, wrote in his medical journals, "The victors are given wine and women as reward, though the women are those already sentenced. Their screams are heard, but ignored, as they are not citizens." That manuscript was housed in the Vatican archives, marked restricted until 1983. Why? Because it confirmed something the Church didn't want acknowledged, that Rome, the foundation of Western civilization, systematically allowed the rape of condemned women as entertainment. If this is making you question everything you learned about ancient Rome, hit that like button. It tells me you want more buried history exposed. But this was only the beginning. Because after Jus Victoria came something worse. Secret number 2. Here's a question historians don't ask. Where did new gladiators come from? The obvious answer, prisoners of war, criminals, slaves purchased at market. But there was another source, one that Rome never officially documented. Children born in the ludus. In 2003, a historian named Dr. Elena Martinelli discovered a bureaucratic record in the Roman archives, a tax document from 96 AD. It listed property assets of the Ludus Magnus. Among livestock, weapons, and armor, there was a line item, Infantes Gladiatorum, 23. Gladiator infants, 23. 20 babies, listed as property. Dr. Martinelli cross-referenced this with other records and found a pattern. Every major gladiator school had a similar line item, children born inside the ludus, raised from birth to fight. But here's the horror that took years to piece together. These children weren't born from gladiator families. Gladiators weren't allowed to marry. They weren't allowed conjugal visits. So where did the children come from? The female prisoners. The ones kept in the tunnels. The ones subjected to Jus Victoria. The ones who became pregnant. Roman law stated that children born to condemned prisoners inherited their mother's legal status, damnati, which meant they could be executed, or enslaved, or trained. And Rome chose to train them, because a child raised from birth to fight, with no memory of freedom, no family, no identity beyond the arena, made the perfect gladiator. No rebellion, no hope, no mercy. One account from the historian Plutarch describes visiting a ludus and seeing children no older than 7, training with wooden swords, born of the condemned, knowing no other life. He called them the saddest creatures in Rome. But he also noted, they fight with a ferocity that free men cannot match. They have nothing to lose, for they were born with nothing. This is the hidden machine of the Colosseum. It didn't just consume lives, it reproduced them. Women entered as prisoners, were violated by gladiators, gave birth in chains, and their children became the next generation of killers. A closed loop of trauma and violence. But the deepest horror wasn't what Rome did to these women. It was what Rome made them do. Secret number 3. September 2nd, 112 AD. Emperor Trajan sponsors games to celebrate a military victory. The Colosseum is packed. The morning executions are finished. Animal hunts are complete. And then something unusual. 2 women enter the arena, armor glinting, swords drawn. The crowd goes silent, not in respect, in shock, because women were forbidden from becoming gladiators. It was illegal, unthinkable, an insult to Mars. And yet, here they were. These were the feminae gladiatrices, female gladiators. And their existence was erased from history for 1,800 years, until 1996. When archaeologists in London discovered a grave, inside, the skeleton of a woman, buried with gladiator honors, lanterns, ceremonial oils, and the remains of expensive weaponry. The discovery shattered the historical consensus. Women had fought in the arena, but Rome tried to erase them. Why? Because acknowledging female gladiators meant acknowledging where they came from. The female prisoners in the tunnels, the ones subjected to ius victoria, the ones who gave birth to gladiator children. Some of these women were given a choice: die in execution or fight. If you fought well enough, if you survived, you could earn your freedom. Maybe. Eventually. It was a lie, of course. Most died in their first fight, but some didn't. Some became killers, and the crowd loved it. Not because they admired the women, but because watching women kill each other was a novelty, a perversion, entertainment at its darkest. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote, "Women of rank were compelled to disgrace themselves in the arena. It was considered more shameful than death." But here's the buried truth. Some of these women won, again and again. They became celebrities. The crowd chanted their names. And Rome couldn't allow that. Because if condemned women could become heroes, the entire moral structure of Roman justice collapsed. So, in 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus banned female gladiators, not because it was immoral, but because it was becoming too popular. The women were erased from records, their graves destroyed, their names forgotten, until archaeologists started digging and found the bones. Comment below if you'd ever heard about female gladiators before this video. I guarantee 99% of you hadn't. That's how effectively Rome erased them. But even the female gladiators who survived faced one final horror. Secret number 4. In Roman law, gladiators could earn their freedom through a symbol, the rudis, a wooden sword, given to gladiators who had fought with exceptional skill and courage. It symbolized retirement, freedom, a return to civilian life. But here's what they don't tell you. Receiving the rudis didn't make you a citizen. It made you freed, not free. You still belonged to Rome. You could be recalled, re-enslaved, executed if you refused. For female gladiators, the few who survived long enough, The rudis came with an additional condition: sterilization. There are medical records from the 2nd century describing procedures performed on freed female gladiators: cauterization of the womb, forced hysterectomies. The reasoning was documented by the physician Serranus. A woman who has fought as a beast cannot be allowed to bear children. Her bloodline is corrupted by violence. Her offspring would inherit her savagery. This was Roman eugenics. Women who had been forced into the arena, who had been violated, enslaved, and made to kill, were then punished for surviving. Their bodies were mutilated, their futures erased. And they were released into a Rome that despised them. Freed female gladiators were forbidden from entering temples, owning property, marrying citizens. They lived in slums outside the city walls, worked as prostitutes, died forgotten. One account from 140 AD describes a freed female gladiator named Valeria. She had won 19 fights, earned her rudis, and was found dead 3 years later in the Tiber River, weighted down with stones. No investigation, no record of who killed her, just a body. Another erased woman. But the final secret, the one Rome buried deepest, wasn't about what they did to female prisoners. It was about who was watching. Secret number 5. Here is the most disturbing truth. Everything I've described, that Jus Victoria, the forced pregnancies, the female gladiators, the sterilizations, wasn't hidden in shadows. It happened in front of an audience. Not the 80,000 in the Colosseum, a different audience, a private one, the imperial box. Emperors didn't just watch the games, they designed them. Caligula personally selected which female prisoners would be sent to the gladiators. Nero staged elaborate executions where women were forced to reenact mythological rapes before being killed. Commodus, who famously fought as a gladiator himself, demanded female prisoners be brought to his chambers after games. Not for execution, for his personal entertainment. These weren't rumors, they were documented by Roman historians. Suetonius wrote, "The divine Commodus took pleasure in debasing women of noble birth, forcing them to fight as gladiators, then taking them as spoils." Cassius Dio recorded, "Nero would watch as condemned women were violated by gladiators, calling it the theater of Mars." This was policy, imperial entertainment, and it reveals the core truth about Rome. The Colosseum wasn't just a place of execution. It was a machine of sexual violence, designed by emperors, operated by guards, performed by broken men, and endured by women who had no names, no rights, no chance of survival. The 2018 excavation beneath the Colosseum found something else. Carved into the wall of the sealed chamber, one sentence, in Latin. Translated, it reads, "We were not beasts. We were daughters." 12 words, scratched into stone, by women who knew they would die, but wanted someone, someday, to know. They had existed. They had mattered. And what was done to them was not justice. It was horror. So here is the truth Rome tried to bury for 2,000 years. The Colosseum was not a symbol of glory. It was a factory of trauma. And the women who suffered there were not footnotes. They were the invisible foundation of an empire. 80,000 people cheered. Emperors smiled. History recorded the names of gladiators and generals. But beneath the sand, in the tunnels, in the sealed chambers, the bones remember. In 2021, the Italian government finally allowed the full publication of the 2018 findings. The report concluded. The evidence suggests systematic sexual violence against female prisoners in the Colosseum tunnels, spanning multiple centuries, with implicit approval from Roman authorities. It took 2,000 years. But the truth came out. Not because Rome wanted it known. but because the women who carved "We Were Daughters" into stone refused to be forgotten. This is historical horror, not because of the blood in the arena, but because of the silence that followed. The silence of an empire that built its glory on the bodies of women no one remembers. Until now. If you made it to the end, you just witnessed history that was meant to stay buried. Here's what I need you to do. First, smash that like button. It tells YouTube that this content matters and helps it reach people who need to see the truth. Second, subscribe and turn on all notifications. I'm digging up more forbidden history that textbooks won't teach you. Next week, the horrifying truth about what Viking raiders really did to monastery nuns. You don't want to miss it. Third, comment below with one word, buried, if you think this story should be taught in schools. Let's see how many of us believe these women deserve to be remembered. And finally, share this video. Send it to someone who loves history. Because the algorithm buries content like this. YouTube doesn't want you seeing the dark truth about civilizations we're taught to admire. Prove them wrong. Share it. The women who died in those tunnels deserve to be remembered. And you just became part of making sure they are. See you in the next one.